It all began on a bitterly cold night, with snow swirling in the air seemingly out of nowhere. My cell phone pierced the quiet, and as I answered it, I was met with the wrathful voice of my mother-in-law on the other end. "It's because of you that my daughter's in this state," she spat, her anger palpable even through the phone. Face is unrecognizable. It's atrocious. You need to take responsibility. Why did you abandon my daughter? You're despicable. Amy, a 33-year-old woman, lived with my husband Zach, his parents, and an older sister. That single phone call from my mother-in-law at night turned my life upside down. Give me back my lively girl. Why did you do something so horrible? I swear I'll make you pay for this. I'll never forgive you. My mother-in-law's words poured like venom, making no sense out of shock. Mother-in-law, please calm down, I pleaded, attempting to console her despite my confusion. But her tirade continued unabated. You have no right to be calm at a time like this. It's all your fault, and yet you have the audacity to say such things. Why didn't you help her? Why did you abandon her? Her accusations echoed loudly, drowning out any attempt at rational conversation. Even as I urged her to speak slowly, it was as if my words fell on deaf ears. The vitriol persisted, fueled by her grief and anger. Eventually, my father-in-law took over the phone, his tone slightly calmer. Amy, I hope you understand what you've done. Do you understand the state our daughter is in now? Fortunately, her life is not in danger, but she has severe injuries. Why did you let her suffer like this? Feeling utterly bewildered, I confess, Father, I'm sorry. I really don't understand what you two are talking about. What on earth happened? His response left me dumbfounded. My sister-in-law, a single mother, lived with her young child just a 20-minute walk from our home. She had been dating the young boyfriend who frequently visited, a fact that shook me to my core. I had learned from Zach that he had a quick temper and had often resorted to violence against my sister-in-law. Apparently, his mood was particularly sour last night, and my sister-in-law endured more brutality than usual. Feeling their lives were in danger, she fled the house in a panic, clutching her child tightly as they disappeared into the falling snow. With nowhere else to turn, she thought of her brother, who lived nearby, and ran desperately toward our house, seeking refuge. She rang the doorbell, and I, being home at the time, answered. She stood there, her face bruised, gasping for breath, holding her child, the only clothing she had. Anyone could see at a glance that something was terribly wrong, but Zach showed no concern for his own sister. Instead, he appeared irritated and said, "If I let people in without permission, Amy will get mad." "Sorry, but can you go home? She's scary when she's angry. You understand, right? Please leave." With that, he turned her away. My sister-in-law couldn't believe her brother's callousness, but she was in immediate danger and needed to find somewhere to hide. In tears, she begged him to at least lend her money for a hotel. But Zach's response was even more shocking. "There's no way I have that kind of money. There's money in the house, but there's no way Amy would let me use it without permission. If I did something like that, she'd divorce me. Sorry, but could you try somewhere else? It's cold, so I'm going in. See you." And with that, he closed the door, leaving my sister-in-law and her child in utter despair. They trudged back through the snow, fearing they would freeze to death, and reluctantly returned home, only to face even worse violence from her enraged boyfriend. She was beaten until her face was unrecognizable, and her child was kicked until losing consciousness. She tried to stop him by clinging to her boyfriend, but the violence only escalated, and her screams echoed through the neighborhood along with the sound of breaking dishes and destruction. A passerby, alarmed by the commotion, reported it to the police. Afterward, my sister-in-law and her child, battered and collapsed, were found and immediately rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Though conscious, they were severely injured and required hospitalization with a prognosis of 1 month for full recovery. I arrived home late last night due to work, and my sister-in-law hadn't shown up by then. If I had been there, I would never have turned her away. Had I seen her in that state, I would have deemed it dangerous, let her in, and promptly called the police. It bewilders me why my in-laws believe I turned her away. Despite the shock of such a terrible incident happening to my sister-in-law, I couldn't grasp the reality of my in-laws blaming me. I felt deeply confused, especially under my father-in-law's relentless accusations. I knew I had to clear up the misunderstanding. Frantically, I explained that I wasn't home when my sister-in-law came by. I had been working late at the cafe run. If I had been home, I would have noticed her unusual behavior and let her in. I would never turn her away. Please give me some time to figure out what happened. Although he wasn't convinced, he seemed to cool down and hung up the phone. That day, I was working late at my cafe, developing a new menu. I had informed Zach about the expected time I'd be home, but I ended up working longer. I missed the last subway and had to take a taxi, not arriving home till past midnight. When I got home, I saw Zach, but he didn't mention a thing about his sister. I was confused about his actions. However, when I confronted him after he came home from work that night, his response was shocking. I could tell something was wrong when she showed up, but I was just about to enjoy my beer, and it was cold outside, so I wanted to close the door quickly. Plus, I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I couldn't hide my anger at his selfish excuse. Didn't you feel anything seeing her like that? Why couldn't you at least let her in? She's been through a lot since you turned her away. When I detailed his sister's current condition, he justified himself by saying, "Remember how you used to complain when my parents dropped in without notice? I thought I was being considerate by not letting her in, thinking you wouldn't like it. What did I do wrong?" It turned out he had assumed that I would be bothered if his sister showed up unannounced and turned her away. I asked him another question. "Why did you lend her any money? You could have done that much, couldn't you?" He responded, "I was taken aback when she asked for money. I was short on cash right before payday, having recently lost money playing slots, and I hardly had $10 in my wallet. If I gave her her household money, I knew you would get mad, so I refused." I don't see anything wrong with what I said. I defended myself. I was speechless, completely shocked. I had always thought he was a bit self-centered, but he also had many good qualities. I had been giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I realized it was a terrible mistake. He was incapable of making sound decisions because he always put himself first. He had no compassion for others, not even a bit of kindness, and he was foolish enough to prioritize his drinking over his own sister's distress. But it was too late to realize this now. He didn't seem to feel guilty or responsible at all about his sister being rushed to the hospital. From my perspective, she would have ended up like this anyway, no matter where she ran off to. On the bright side, she's safe in the hospital now. We're both safe, all thanks to me, right? He was talking about it as if it was someone else's business. His heartless remarks were making me feel like I was losing my sanity, so I decided not to talk to him any longer, holding back my anger. I reported to my father-in-law about Zach's irresponsible behavior towards his sister the previous night. Upon hearing my words, Zach's father lost his composure in a fit of rage. He exclaimed, "There's no way my Zach would do such a thing to his own sister. You're lying. Stop making up stories, Amy. Are you trying to make Zach the worst just to escape your own guilt? If you're going to spew such nonsense, then show me some proof." He refused to listen to me at all and again blamed me for everything. I endured his accusations while desperately trying to figure out how to prove my innocence. If things remained this way, I would be branded a monster, while Zach, the real culprit who drove his sister away, would live on without any sense of guilt or retribution. This was a situation I could not tolerate. After much thought, I remembered that my sister-in-law had arrived at our home around 9 p.m. that night. I found something that could prove my innocence. My shop was equipped with a security camera. The footage clearly showed me working alone until around 11 p.m. that night. Armed with this footage and another piece of evidence, a taxi receipt that showed the time I got home, I went to my in-laws and proved that I wasn't at home when your daughter came home. Do you believe me now? It was probably something they didn't want to believe, but faced with clear evidence, they had no choice but to accept it. Zach's father, his hand trembling, muttered, though Amy wasn't home then. Despite their shock, Zach's parents hardly called him in to uncover the truth about that night. The moment he arrived, they fiercely demanded, "Why did you drive your sister away, just as you had done with me?" Zach tried to deflect all blame onto me, claiming that he thought I would dislike having his sister in our home. Hearing this, his father said, "We already know that Amy wasn't home after that time, but your sister says she saw a woman in the house. How do you explain that, Zach?" I was speechless. If there was another woman in our home at 9 p.m., there was only one possible explanation. "Wait, Zach, what is going on? Who is this woman?" I asked him, my voice shaking. Zach's face turned pale as he squirmed under the questioning from both his parents and me until he finally confessed everything. When I told him I would be late because I was working on a new menu, he saw it as an opportunity to bring his mistress home. He knew I often came home after midnight when I was immersed in my work, so he felt safe in inviting her over. When his sister suddenly showed up asking to be let in, he panicked and drove her away for fear of his affair being discovered. You fool. Not only did you betray Amy, but you also left your only sister out in the snow. What were you thinking? Why didn't you lend her any money? Explain yourself. His father's anger was overwhelming, and Zach confessed the real reason he hadn't given her any money. He actually had plenty of spending money left, but he didn't want to lend it because then he wouldn't be able to buy the bag and shoes he wanted to give his mistress. He didn't want to upset his mistress for the sake of his sister, so he wanted to get rid of her quickly, which led to shutting the door on her. Zach admitted, I was furious, but Zach's parents were even more so. Before being a brother or a husband, you lack basic human decency. It's our responsibility as parents that you grew up to be this kind of person, but we cannot tolerate this and maintain our relationship. From today, we are cutting ties with you. Don't ever show your face to us again. Zach's father disowned him. In a similar vein, I added, I'm divorcing you. You cheated on me and put your sister's life at risk by leaving her out in the snow. I can't live with someone like you anymore. Zach was shocked at being disowned and confronted with a divorce all at once. He started begging for forgiveness, crying, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Please forgive me. He clung to his father's leg, but his father simply shook him off. What you did is the absolute worst thing in our eyes. His parents and I never forgave Zach. Apparently, he had been having an affair with the other woman for a year now. The mistress was a co-worker at his company whom he'd been secretly bringing to our house when I wasn't around. It was infuriating to learn I've been betrayed behind my back for so long. Zach even tried to blame his treatment of my sister-in-law on me, which only added to my anger. So I had no second thought about divorcing him. I made Zach sign the divorce papers and immediately submitted them. Right after, I headed to a law firm, hired a lawyer, and filed for substantial damages from both Zach and his mistress. I also called Zach's boss, who had been our matchmaker at our wedding, and reported through my tears that we were getting a divorce. I told him everything about Zach's affair and his mistress. Zach's boss, a man who despised anything against human decency, had repeatedly told Zach at our wedding to never betray his wife. As expected, he was furious when he learned about the infidelity. Word reached upper management, and on his boss's advice, Zach was transferred to a branch office in the countryside. His mistress was moved to a different department where she was made to sort documents all day. However, my sister-in-law's revenge against the two was even more ruthless. Still suffering from the after effects of her injuries, she deeply resented Zach's actions that day. To vent her hatred, she did something even more extreme than what I did. By coincidence, she was working at one of Zach's company's clients and knew some of Zach's colleagues. Using her connections, she revealed and spread within the company the cruelty she and her child had suffered that day. The company's employees, who had thought the divorce was due only to the affair, were shocked to learn the truth. Zach's abandonment of his own sister to cover up his affair was a huge shock to everyone in the company. The rumor quickly spread throughout the company, and Zach was universally suspected of being a terrible human being. Once he was ostracized by everyone, his work was impacted, and after a while, he was demoted. He couldn't stand being avoided by everyone and found it hard to continue working at his new post, so he ended up quitting. To pay me the high alimony, he drained his savings and is still paying me by working live and part-time jobs. Almost all his salary goes towards the payment, and I've heard he can't even afford a coat for winter and shivers in thin t-shirts. As for the mistress, she stubbornly clung to her job amidst the judgmental glances of her co-workers, despite my demand for damages after consulting my lawyer. I decided to ask her parents for the payment. When her parents learned about it, they were shocked and immediately made their daughter pay the full amount. After confirming the facts, I kept receiving calls from her, which I never answered, but she left numerous abusive messages in my voicemail, saying, "Why did you tell my parents? I had to go into debt to make the payment. My life is ruined because of you." As I found it unbearable, I sent these messages to her parents. I received an apology letter later promising they would never let their daughter trouble me again, and the harassing phone calls stopped. As for my sister-in-law, her abusive boyfriend's actions became a police matter, and she was able to file for damages for her injuries. It had been tough, but she finally managed to break up with him. My in-laws and sister-in-law apologized to me for initially suspecting me and for Zach's infidelity. Of course, both were painful experiences for me, but I could understand their outrage and loss of composure when they saw their daughter taken away in an ambulance after such severe abuse. After all, Zach's affair wasn't their fault. I didn't hold a grudge against them. On the contrary, I wanted them to properly heal the emotional wounds of my sister-in-law and her child who had such a terrible experience. If I were in their shoes, I'm sure my parents would have reacted the same way. Furthermore, my in-laws and sister-in-law are fundamentally decent people. Now that I've divorced Zach, I'll probably never see them again as they are now strangers to me. But I sincerely wish them well and hope they take care of themselves. I moved closer to the cafe run since it's within walking distance. I no longer have to worry about the last train, and I can devote my time to coming up with new menu ideas. Though I was thrown around by unexpected events, I probably wouldn't have been happy if I continued to be married. There are things one must never do as a human being. I firmly intend to always keep that in mind and live a life I can be proud of. That's what I strongly believe.